It is now January and it has gotten very cold here in the mountains of Western North Carolina. So with that, it's got me thinking a lot about a mod that I've been wanting to do for a long time. So given that it is still winter for quite a few months here, I went ahead and picked up this kit finally to wire in heated seats to the truck. So the kit itself comes with basically everything you're going to need for install. Obviously it has one set of pads for each of the driver and passenger seat, but it also has this huge wiring harness. So we've got the variable temperature switch, we've got some sort of control module, a relay, inline fuse, and it's kind of this big jumble of wires that if you're somewhat inexperienced of an electrician like me is a little bit daunting to look at. And that's going to be the main focus of this video. There's other videos out there of people installing these kits in their trucks, but for first gens and especially on the forums, I found that most people tend to glance over the wiring aspect of this install. Whereas for me, I think that's the most important part to make sure that I'm doing something properly. So I think I've got it figured out, and that's what I'm going to highlight in this video is how to actually wire it into your truck. So with that said, we'll get a closer look at this harness here and go over all the components, and then we'll get into the actual install. Now, when you search for these kits on eBay, you'll find that there are dozens of examples. Almost all of them come from China, and they're almost all pretty much identical, save for maybe a few configurations of the switch, circular, square, variable temperature versus just on and off, that sort of thing. But they basically all operate on the same principle. So to start, again, we have two sets of pads. So for the driver's seat and the passenger seat, you'll have one pad that goes on the back, and then you'll have one pad that goes on the seat. So these four clips here connect into the harness, and we'll fish those through underneath the seat eventually. So on one end of our long harness here, we've got these clips that just attach into the seat pads themselves. These are identical, except one of them is going to be left and one of them is going to be right in terms of how the switch controls each of them. So I will test and label these before we install, just so we know that we have the right side hooked up. So now on the business end of the harness, we have quite a bit more going on. So let's start with the switch. So I specifically chose this switch because I know that based on the measurements provided in the eBay listing, the shape of this switch is actually a direct match for the shape of the cutout of your switch blanks on your first gen and other early Toyota models as well. So these are exactly the same spot. So if you wanted to, you can sit this right into one of these switch blank locations. I have a different plan for this switch, which I'm going to get into in a little bit, but just so we know that. So the switch plugs directly into this control module. Again, I'm not entirely sure what this is doing. However, after the control module, you can see we come in here to a relay. So again, I'm no electrician, but the basic concept of a relay is you can use a low powered signal, like a signal from a small switch like this, to control a high powered device. So instead of needing a large switch with the same amperage rating as say our heat pads are going to need, we can use something small like this to safely control that circuit. So coming out of the control module and after the relay, we have four wires here, as you can see. So we have a black wire, which is going to be our ground wire. We have a large red wire with an inline 15 amp fuse, and that's going to be our main power wire. And then we have these two smaller wires here. So the yellow one, this is going to control the backlighting for the switch. And the red one here, this is going to control the power for the switch. So really the best and most proper way to install a system like this would be to add an auxiliary fuse panel somewhere inside the engine bay. A lot of guys do that if they have other big high-powered accessories like lights or a winch or something like that. This is my daily driver. I'm not going to be installing stuff like that. So to make it simpler for myself and probably for a lot of people watching, I'm going to use this add a circuit fuse tap instead. And what this is going to allow us to do is piggyback off of another circuit in the fuse panel inside the cab. And the way these fuse taps function is you remove the fuse from the specific slot on your fuse panel, install it in the lower section of the add a circuit, and then you install your additional fuse into the top slot of that same fuse tap. From what I understand, the top fuse here for your new circuit just can't exceed the amperage rating for the existing fuse. And we'll take a closer look at this when we go to do our install, but there is a correct orientation in which you need to install the fuse tap to make sure that power is flowing through this system effectively. So now that we have a better understanding of the harness, let's take a look at these four wires again. So the first one that we're going to look at is the ground wire here. So luckily that's pretty self-explanatory in that we just need to find a really good location to attach this in the truck that's not going to be disturbed by anything to ensure that we have a good solid ground. So now let's take a look at this yellow wire here. And again, this is the wire that's going to control the backlighting for the switch itself. So what we need to think about here is under what conditions do we want the backlight for the switch to be on? Do we care if it's on when our daylight running lights are on? Do we only care if it's on when the key is in the ignition? Do we want it always on? Those types of things. So we'll talk a little bit about this later, but for all intents and purposes right now, we can sort of set this aside. And really what we're concerned about are these two wires here, which are really going to be the main control wires for this circuit. So on the right here, again, this is the smaller wire that controls power to the switch itself. So that's why it's smaller. It requires less amperage to control that circuit. And so our larger wire on the left here, that's going to be our main power wire for the pads themselves. So on the eBay listing for the power spec, it tells us that each of the pads could consume between 2 and 3 amps. So when we're looking at the whole system in a scenario in which both of the pads are on full power, we could be drawing between 4 and 6 amps. And with that rating, the manufacturer chose to include a 15 amp inline fuse for that larger power wire. And when we're hooking anything up to our vehicle's battery, we want to make sure that we're not drawing power at times in which that's going to deplete the battery's storage. So when we think about this switch wire on the right here, really what we want is we want power to only be allowed to go to this switch when our key is in the ignition, aka when the vehicle is turned on. And the fail-safe that that's going to provide for us is in the scenario in which, say, we forget to turn off the switch on one of our pads and we turn the truck off, it's not going to draw power from the battery and drain that battery. So when we go to start the vehicle, it's totally dead. So now that we've established that we're going to be connecting our switch to a power source that's only going to be accessible when the key is in the ignition, because we have this relay, that basically ensures that we will never be able to turn on the heating pads unless the key is in the ignition. And this means that we should be able to connect our larger power wire to a constant 12-volt battery source in our fuse panel. And we can do that because we know that our switch, which controls the flow of electricity through this relay and through this whole system, can only be turned on when the key is in the ignition. So before we get too committed here, I really want to do a full test of the system just to even make sure that the pads work and that the way that I'm thinking of this circuit and the way that I tap into my fuses is going to make sense and is actually going to function the way that I want it to. So what we're going to need at first is 2 fuse taps. So I've already got the fuses added in there and I'll show you what that looks like in terms of what I'm referencing in the fuse panel once we get in there. But what I'm going to do for now is I'm just going to tap the backlighting wire and the switch wire into one fuse just to give them the same power circuit that you know, they'll both have, and we'll just leave it for now. I might do something different with the backlighting wire eventually, but that'll be good for now. And then we'll also have a fuse tap on the main power wire. Okay, so we are now in the truck and we're just going to take a quick look at our fuse panel here. So it's located right here in the knee panel. You can just pop this little cover off and it has this guide to show us which fuse controls which circuit. So right off the bat, I would not mess around with anything that looks like it's really critical, like ECU, for example, 4-wheel drive, stuff like that. Really what you're going to be wanting to use is your accessory power, things that are just going to control sort of non-essential equipment on your vehicle. So if we look in here, you can sort of get an idea of what the fuse panel looks like. You have various amperage ratings on each of these fuses, and they each control a separate circuit. So first up, when we're trying to figure out which of these fuse locations is switched and which of them have constant power, we can use our multimeter to discover that. So on our multimeter, I have the black lead hooked up to a ground. So I just have this alligator clip clipped onto a bolt on the side of the truck as a ground. And then with our positive lead here, and with the device set to your voltage setting, what I can do is come in and find the little metal piece on the side. You can see on the edge of the fuses here, these are exposed. On my fuse panel, the right-hand side is where the positive flow is coming from, but you'll have to test that. So if I touch this little positive fuse thing there, that should either give me 12 volts or nothing. And if it's nothing because the truck is off, that means we likely have switch power there. So just to give you an example there, this top one is our accessory. If I put the lead right on that section, we shouldn't have a reading. So a very negligible reading. But if I come over to another fuse, let's go to the one that's labeled ECUB, that 7.5 amp fuse, and I go ahead and touch that right lead there. You can see, even though the truck is off, we've got 12 volts going to that fuse actively. So now that we've figured that out, let's confirm that this accessory fuse here, which is in this top slot, this 15 amp fuse, We are expecting that to be switched, but let's just confirm that by putting the key in the ignition and then testing that again. So now I've got the key in the truck turned to the on position, and let's grab our positive lead here. And let's try this again to see if we now have power. So you can see we now are having 12 volts go to that fuse, which means that we do have a switched power source. So on my heated seat harness here, again, we combined both the backlighting and the switch power into one cable just for testing purposes for now. So let's look at that fuse tap. And because we figured out that we're going to tap into that top accessory fuse slot with the 15 amps, we have the fuse tap set up like this. The bottom one has to be the same as the one in the panel there. So we have 15 amp fuse there. And then I just added a 10 amp fuse on top of that to control the rest of that circuit. So we'll go ahead and insert this. And again, we need to make sure we have the orientation correct, and I'll explain what that means in a second here. So I went ahead and pulled that 15 amp accessory fuse out. And what I just want to highlight is that there is a positive and a negative side for these fuse terminals. So that's going to dictate which orientation we install our fuse tap. So again, I've got the key in the ignition, and let's test each side of that fuse panel just to prove that point. So we're going to test the right-hand side here, and we can see that we've got 12 volts. Now let's put that in the left-hand side here. We've got nothing. So that means that we know the right-hand side is the positive side. And on our fuse tap, the way these are designed from what my research showed, you have to have the outside prong here, the one my finger is touching, connected to the positive side. Otherwise, the electricity won't flow through the circuit correctly, and you won't be really appropriately protecting your circuits. So we also need to figure out where we're going to install our fuse tap for our main power source. So again, for this one, we can connect it to a constant 12 volt source. We can also connect it to another switched, but I don't really see another great candidate here. And I just want to figure out where I can find a constant power for this. And I also noticed that we have a few empty slots. You can see here there's 3 empty slots, and I'm just curious if we can find 12 volt power constant in either of those. So with the keys out of the ignition, which means that we're going to be able to identify constant 12 volt power sources, let's take our positive lead here and see if any of these empty ones on the bottom meet that mark. So I've got that in there, and sure enough, we do have constant 12 volts in that slot. So now, instead of having to piggyback off of another component in my truck in that circuit, I can just tap into an empty slot here. Just be aware that even though I'm not removing a fuse from any existing circuit, you do still need to have 2 fuses here because that completes the circuit in the fuse tap itself. So here's a look at the full testing setup. So we have the pads plugged into their respective harnesses. We've got our ground connected in a very poor fashion, but again, we're just testing to that same ground cable that I had the multimeter hooked up to. We've got both our backlighting and our switch wire hooked into that fuse tap on top for the switched accessory power. And then we've got our main power wire here, again, hooked into that blank constant 12 volt source on the bottom there. So with the key out of the ignition, we would not expect any power to be getting to the system right now. So you can see the light for the switch is not turned on. This isn't working. You know, when I turn it on, the light doesn't come on, anything like that. So we know that we're okay as of right now. Now let's put the key in the ignition, turn it to the on position, and let's check our switch. And now you can see we've got the backlight on. So we know that that switched power is getting to our system now. Okay, so I don't drain the battery. I'm going to turn the truck fully on, and then we'll turn the heat pads on themselves. So we'll let those heat up, and then we'll get a temperature gun on there and see if they're getting hot. So I've let this warm up for a few minutes here, so let's take a measurement. And you can see clearly we are getting hot. So that's great news. We know that this is working how we want it to. So now we can run a cool little test here just to prove that we've actually done this effectively, and that when the truck is off, there is 0 chance that power is going to get back to this circuit. So a relay has a physical lever inside that will open and close via, I think there's magnetic coils in there, when it receives power from a low amperage system like a switch, and that controls flow of power to the larger circuit. And what's kind of neat is you can actually hear that physical click and even feel it when you're holding it when that circuit is open and closed. So let's run a fail-safe test here where, for example, let's say that I accidentally left the variable control on when I got out of the truck. So that's a scenario in which we might be worried, oh, is there some sort of parasitic draw coming from it because we haven't turned the switch actually off? So to know that we don't have that happening, what we can listen for is the opening of this circuit and therefore cutting off the flow of electricity to the pads themselves. So we can actually hear that circuit closing. So I'll put the mic right next to it and I'll show you what I mean. So again, let's say that we left the switch on into the on position, into the full power position, but let's just remove the key from that and you'll see that it cuts off the circuit, opens up that relay, and you'll actually be able to hear that happen. And beyond just the click of that relay, something that we can also test, which is a much more scientific method, is to test the power supply at the hot ends of the heating pad wires when the power is off to the ignition. And with the truck on and our positive lead from the multimeter into the power supply for the heat pad, you can see we do have power. And now with the keys out of the ignition and the truck off, again, we've got our positive multimeter lead into the wire of the heater. You can see we're dead flat at 0 on our multimeter there. So that means for sure that all power is cut from this system. This is exciting because we have proof of concept. Obviously, this is not the final state of the actual wiring. I might have to extend some of these wires based on how we route everything, but we're good for that for now, and we can go ahead and start removing our seats. I am gonna pull out my passenger seat first. So something to note is some people will actually take the fabric off of their seat cushions, put the heated seat underneath the actual OEM fabric, and then reinstall it with hog rings and all that. I have seat covers on my truck that I actually really like. So instead of me getting into all that, removing the OEM fabric, I'm just gonna slide them between the seat cover and the actual seat itself. So it won't be quite as much work, but still I'm gonna take these out because I have to take the chair out to get the seat covers off, and I'll probably use that as a chance to wash the seat covers as well. So I'm gonna pull these out. It's an 8mm hex in the front, 2 bolts in the front, and then 2 14mm bolts in the rear. All right, I've got the seat apart. That seat cover was really on there really good, but pretty cool to see that the fabric is actually in really good shape on both the back and the front. Looks like a little bit dirty, but yeah, I hadn't ever taken the seat covers off, so this is the first time of me seeing the OEM fabric. But I'll take it into the shop. I'm gonna take a closer look just at how the OEM fabric is connected. I don't know, I might investigate seeing if I can put the heat pad under there, but if not, I'll just put it on top again, like I said, in between the seat cover and that fabric, but I'm gonna take it inside to finish this up. Okay, I feel like I can never convince myself to do anything halfway, so I kind of just started pulling the OEM fabric off just to see how hard it would be to actually do that instead of just putting it in between the seat cover and the OEM fabric. So it's really not that difficult to get it off. You can see on the OEM fabric underneath, there's just sort of these plastic lips that sort of slip onto the frame. So once you pull those off, the only thing left holding the fabric on are these hog rings. So the foam itself has a bar, a metal bar cast into the foam. And then the seat has a metal bar underneath the fabric, and the hog ring basically just connects those two together. So that's what gives you the nice tuck on the seams of the fabric. There's one, you know, going across laterally here. So the problem is that the heating pad, in order to go beyond that, and so you can still have that hog ring connecting the fabric in the middle there, you're supposed to cut a slit into this heating pad. So I've seen tons of videos of people, I'm pretty sure, using this exact same kit. You can kind of see the pattern there. It looks exactly the same, the ones that people are using. The only thing is my specific directions of whatever generic Chinese directions they got a screenshot of on the eBay posting say specifically not to cut it, but I'm kind of convincing myself that it's fine to cut it horizontally, cut a slot in, not all the way across, but just sort of like that, to notch out space for those hog rings to clip into the foam. So I don't know, I risk ruining the pads if I commit to that, but I kind of want to do it now that I'm in here. So I might just try it with one, just send it and test it in my wiring harness, just test it in the truck to make sure it still works. And if that works, then I guess I'll continue with the project doing it like that. So now that I've got that seat cover off, and again, these are just connected via these little hog rings. Now that I've got that off, you can kind of get a better idea of how it looks on the actual raw fabric, or on the raw foam rather. So the problem that we run into again is we need to have this seam free so that we can tuck that fabric back in and connect it to this rod, which is again cast into the foam. So I think I'm going to send this. The ones on eBay that have instructions to cut it literally look identical, so I think we'll be okay. It does specify to only cut horizontally, so I'm literally just going to try to make a small slit, just enough, wide enough to slide that piece in and get those hog rings hooked backed up. But I'll do the slit and then I'll test it again and see if it works, just to make sure, so I don't ruin all of them if by chance it doesn't work. But I think we're going to go ahead and run with this. We committed to that cut, and I've got it now hooked up to our testing harness again, just to confirm that it does still heat up. And it's kind of finicky because I can't get it landed, but you can see we're hot there. And we're hot there, so we didn't ruin it. So I had a hunch that was the case. I think all these generic heating pads are designed to be cut horizontally like that, as long as you don't cut the whole thing in half, obviously. So let's go ahead and try that. I think instead of doing it in between the seat cover and the OEM fabric, I'll just pull the actual fabric off and get it officially installed. So I wasn't planning on doing that, but I just can't help myself. So we're gonna move forward with that. I've also got the original hog rings here, so I don't really think you need to buy hog ring pliers to do this. I just used a couple of needle nose pliers to pull these out, straighten them out a little bit now that they're out, and then when I reinstall them, I should just be able to use pliers to just clamp them shut. So I don't think you really need to go too crazy with buying special equipment to remove these. You can, do the best with the materials that you have. All right, and I also just kind of shook the dust out of the OEM fabric and wiped it down a little bit where I could. But now that this is set in there, we'll go ahead and get this back on and get these hog rings connected. There's 3 sections here that have hog rings. So this is the one in the middle that we just made the slit for, and then there are 2 on the side. So luckily the pad fits perfectly in the middle of the seat, so we don't have to cut anything on the sides. That'll slip in just fine. So yeah, let's get these hog rings back in now. Okay, I'm actually realizing something I forgot to do is just add a little bit of tape where I made the cut, just to protect any of that from any wear or anything, or any metal touching it. And I'm just going to use a little bit of gaffer tape for that. All right, that's looking a lot better. We have those edges protected now, so let's move ahead and get that OEM fabric back in. And because the width of this piece of fabric here with this metal rod going through that we hook our hog rings to is a little bit wider than the opening that I cut in this pad, I'm just going to trim a little bit off of each end. That's not going to hurt the the structural ability of this at all. It's just going to allow it to sit in there a little bit nicer. So just cut about 1 inch off each end. So we've got our wire hanging out the back here. That will make sure we'll just protect that. And then lastly, we just had a couple more hog rings connecting this extra piece here to this bottom support, just to keep that taut. All right, and there we have it. Fabric's back on, secured, and we've got our heated seat wire out here. Okay, so now with the upper fabric, it looks like we've just got 2 hog rings sort of midway up here. There's none on the sides. It doesn't appear to be any on the sides. So we just got to pop these 2 out, and then probably won't take the fabric all the way off because these clips on top are preventing that. I don't really need to. I'll just sort of inverse fold it upwards, and then we can just pull it back down. We got those 2 hog rings out, and obviously, like I said, we can just sort of inverse the fabric upwards. And now we've got to sort of place our new heating pad on here and figure out again where we need to cut a slit so that we can access those hog rings again when we're reinstalling. All right, I finally got those two hog rings back in. Those were significantly harder to get back on because they're so deep in there, but I've got them in good enough, and I'm gonna go ahead and put this fabric back down. We finished up the passenger side seat the other day, and now moving on to the driver's side seat. It's really cold today and I'm feeling a little under the weather, so I'm gonna do my best to get the seat out, get the heat pads installed, and get it back in today. So essentially finish the project today, just because this is my daily driver and I don't want to have the seat out in case I need to use the truck. So gonna do a speed round getting started on removing the driver's seat.
I'll repeat what I say, but I'll never explain, so you don't have to waste your time. You don't have to waste your time. Hacking up 100 hills.
I just wanted to pause quick to just show how much worse the driver's side foam is, especially on the seat cover. You can see it's just totally deteriorating, and you know, if you think about it, this cushion is the one that's getting the most abuse over the years, and typically this edge, which is again the edge facing the door on the driver's side, is almost always completely, you know, shredded on a lot of these older trucks. But that said, this main area is actually still pretty firm. There's no tearing. It's mostly just the liner here that's sort of disintegrating, which isn't as big of a deal. So I was happy to see that. I know you can buy replacement cushions for these sometimes, but they're really expensive. And yeah, so I was just happy to see that and making good progress on getting these torn down. The hard part is now done. We've got both of the seats back together. So now we need to revisit the wiring harness again, and just to make sure that we're ready to install it. So I want to revisit the switch itself, because as I mentioned before, the shape of this specific one is designed to be exactly the same size as the switch blanks for the first gen. So this is that lower trim panel where your cigarette lighter outlets are, and you can see that fits pretty nicely in there. So that would be a great option if you don't feel like going any further than this. You know, most Tacomas have these slots blank. I think sometimes they came with security system input there, but most of the time you have two blank slots. So that looks pretty good, but I wasn't super happy with sort of like the OEM aesthetic of that. There's no way that Toyota would have installed a switch like this sideways so that you can't really see it. So I wasn't super happy with that, and I wanted to find a different way to install this switch. Now, every first gen owner at one point or another has thought about the relative uselessness of this little tray here. It's kind of like, what is it really for? Is it for coins, for trash? I usually just stick like a gum wrapper in there or something, but for the most part, this little slot is not really utilized in a great way. And as I was digging in the depths of Tacomaworld to sort of see what other people have done with heated seat installs, I found someone who had actually figured out a way to get that switch mounted in this area. Now, I've been trying to learn 3D CAD modeling on my own, and I have a 3D printer. So what I came up with was a solution that would actually be able to mount the switch inside this slot right here. It shares the same basic geometry, except we have the exact cutouts for the clips on the side of the switch, as well as these clips on the side here that keep tension into the actual slot. And in the end, I think I pretty much nailed this design, as it really clips into there really nicely. So I don't know about y'all, but to me, that feels like a much more elegant and much more OEM looking solution. So shout out to that person on Tacomaworld. I'll link that thread in here. I don't want to claim ownership over that idea, but I did design and 3D print my own model for this solution. This takes advantage of a largely unused space, and also just is a good place for your hand to be if you're trying to turn on your heated seats. Rather than reaching all the way forward, to the little kick panel there, you just have it right by your cup holders here. And with that now sorted, I just have to figure out my wire management for the rest of the harness. It's this big sort of bulky situation, and I want to make sure that it's as clean and tidy as possible. So I'm going to get inside the truck and figure that out now. All right, so here's an update with where I'm at for sort of routing the wiring harness here. So I attached extensions, so I soldered on new extended cable to the switch and backlighting, which I combined into one string after all. I could have tapped into the shifter light, but I just didn't want to tap into my OEM system. So that's fine. It'll basically, the backlight will always be on when the key's in the ignition. So have those together, extended, have the ground cable extended, and I have the power cable extended. I know it's not ideal that they're all the same color, but red is the only color wire that I had, so I have them labeled for now. So you can see over here, I have the main sort of jumble of things. So the inline fuse, the control switch here, and the relay, I'm gonna have sitting out underneath the driver's seat. I sort of taped up, and I'll do a better tape job on that, but I taped up the majority of the length of the heated seat harness. They give you a lot of extra space. I could cut that down, but I just don't really feel like resoldering all those wires. So for the passenger side, there is a hole here, and on the driver's side, that's where your seatbelt switch comes up. So there's already a hole in the carpet. So for the passenger side heated pad harness, I fished that under there, up and over the transmission tunnel here, and then over, and there is already a hole on the passenger side in your carpet over there. So that works really good. For the switch itself, I will eventually, again, there's already a slit right here. So this is just about where the switch is going to be sitting in the cup holder area. I will route this wire under here, down below, pop up here, and then it plugs in to this little control box here. So it's actually fairly clean so far. And then again, with these ones, I'll have to route them up along here, up along the kick panel, and then up to the fuse box, and I'll have to find a good ground area. But I think this is a better way to do it going this way. A lot of people go up through the shifter area and then up over the steering rack there, but this feels like a bit of a cleaner install, and it prevents you from having wires fished all the way underneath your shifter bezel there. So I think this is a good path. There's already a big wiring loom that goes back here, so I'll just run it right in parallel with that, and we should be pretty good to go. So I will give an update once I have everything plugged in and connected. All right, so here is the final wiring setup. So I just taped up this extra harness a little bit nicer, made sure again that the inline fuse is accessible. This is the two connectors that'll go to the driver's side heat pad, so those are accessible. Again, we've got the passenger side sticking out through the carpet, nice and seamless. And then the switch wire, the power wire, and the ground wire routed under the carpet over alongside this loom. Down here, we connected our ground to this location right here. There's several options that you could choose in there. And then we routed the switch and the power wire up and behind. And then you can see we've got a fairly clean install on the add a circuit fuse taps there. So pretty exciting, because we are all set with wiring, and now I can get the seat back in, get the switch hooked up, and we are ready to do a final test. Here is the cockpit view of the install. So you can see the switch is in, it's lit up, it's working. I can feel the heat coming through. The wiring harness install was successful, but I really do think this is the best solution of options that I've seen. You can imagine if it was installed down here, and especially if you have a scan gauge like I have here, it's just kind of hard to reach that area. Another option would be if you don't have a rear diff locker, this will be a switch blank here, and it would fit in that slot, so that wouldn't be too bad of a slot. But I do think this is the best choice, and I'm just really happy with the overall feel, ergonomics, and just sort of OEM style of this install. Just something that I am realizing though, with these seat covers, they have padding built into them. So if you think about it, when you have your heat pad underneath both the OEM fabric and underneath this fabric, you're not going to feel it right away, maybe as quick as you would if you didn't have the seat cover on. So just take that into account. Again, I decided to put it under the OEM fabric, but maybe if you have a seat cover, it actually might be better to just install it right under the cover, just so that you feel the heat a little bit more. But I've been sitting here with it on full power for about I don't know, 10 minutes, and I can very, very clearly feel the heat coming through. It feels very nice. It's a freezing cold day today, so it does work still with the seat cover on, but you'll probably feel it a little bit less if you didn't have the cover on, or if you just put it in between the seat cover and the OEM fabric. All right, y'all, we are now a couple weeks after I finished doing the install of the heated seats. As you can see, it's still pretty cold, not as cold as it was in North Carolina, but still very cold. And everything has been working really great. I found that when I have it on 5 and I start driving, after about 10 minutes, it gets really, really warm. So I know I mentioned before that the padding on the seat cover, you know, adds another layer that the heat has to get through, but it really does work well, even with the pad underneath the OEM fabric and the seat cover. Another thing that I did was I printed up another one of these little inserts in gray, and it's actually a pretty close match to the gray on the console. So you can imagine people with tan interiors, you could do the same thing. So that's the magic of 3D printing, is you can really make these cool custom pieces, but I think I'll stick with the black for now. But yeah, overall really happy with the project. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'm gonna be doing more first gen videos this year, so be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks.